They discovered it after a storm, a farmhouse skeleton on the outskirts of Chambers County, Alabama. The rain had unearthed something from beneath the collapsed beams, a wooden chest, its iron latch corroded and eaten by time. Inside were letters wrapped in a strip of linen, still faintly smelling of lavender and smoke. The first was dated July 1866, and the handwriting trembled with confession. "I cannot bear their cries at night. They sound too much like him." The letter was signed, EMC, the initials of Evelyn May Carter, a name whispered only in fragments through local rumor. The Carters had been a respected family before the war, cotton planters, churchgoers. But when the patriarch, Thomas Carter, returned from the Confederacy, something in him had cracked beyond repair. And something unspeakable happened in that house before winter fell. The air in the ruin was thick with mildew, and the walls seemed to breathe with the ghosts of the past. There were claw marks on the doorframe, as though someone had tried to escape. The hearth was cold, yet the faint scent of burnt cloth lingered, as if the fire had never truly gone out. Beneath a loose floorboard, someone had carved a single word with a dull knife: Father. Local historians dismissed the discovery at first, calling it mere superstition. But deeper inside that chest were two tiny bracelets, bound together by a faded ribbon. The names etched into them were hauntingly identical: EMC Jr. and EMC Jr. again, the same initials, twice repeated, twins, born of one mother. But whose father? The storm had unearthed more than rotted wood. It had disturbed a story the town had buried for over a century, a story whispered in the dark by those who still remembered the Carters' land, and the shame that hung over it like a curse. Some say Evelyn went mad after childbirth, others claim she never left the house again, raising her children in silence until they vanished without record. But one letter remains unanswered, one sentence that chills the blood even today: "They bear his eyes, though I dare not speak his name." What truly happened inside the Carter farmhouse in 1866? And how deep did that bloodline's sin run? In 1866, Alabama was a graveyard of its former self. The Civil War had ended barely a year before, leaving fields burned to stubble, men broken, and families fractured by hunger and silence. The Carter homestead stood on a ridge above a swamp, the kind of place where fog clung to the earth like breath on glass. The main house was 2 stories tall, white once, though the paint had long been stripped by sun and sorrow. The veranda sagged inward, its boards hollow underfoot. Behind it stretched acres of abandoned cotton fields where weeds rose higher than a man's waist. Evelyn May Carter had been 20 years old that summer. Her father, Thomas Carter, was 53. A Confederate captain returned from prison at Andersonville with one eye clouded white and a heart made of dust. Neighbors remembered the man as changed. He spoke little, slept in the barn, and was known to walk the fields at night whispering prayers no one could hear. His wife, Evelyn's mother, Martha, had died of fever 2 winters earlier. That left Evelyn alone in the house with a father broken by war and a silence that thickened with each passing day. Old church records show that Thomas stopped attending service in May of that year. Evelyn stopped appearing soon after. The pastor's wife, Mrs. Langford, claimed she once visited the house and found the girl pale and trembling, her wrists wrapped in rags. When asked what had happened, Evelyn had whispered, "He doesn't sleep anymore." By midsummer, the Carters were all but forgotten. The war had left too many widows, too many ruined homes. But when Evelyn's belly began to swell, whispers spread through the tiny community of Oak Bend. Some said a Union soldier had forced her. Others swore no soldier had come that far inland. A few, in quiet voices, wondered aloud why Thomas Carter had suddenly rebuilt the nursery his late wife once used. The town. His doctor was summoned months later, by a messenger who refused to say from whom. He left the house before dawn, ashen-faced, and never spoke of what he'd seen inside. What could a man witness in that farmhouse that would haunt him into silence for the rest of his life? Oak Bend was the kind of place that remembered everything but spoke of nothing. A town of 40 families, 1 church and a single dirt road curling through the pine hollows. People there lived by the rhythm of seasons, planting, harvesting, burying. But in the autumn of 1866, they began to whisper about the Carter girl. It started with a midwife, old Lottie Haynes, who'd been called to the farmhouse one night and never returned. Her husband found her 2 days later wandering the road barefoot, her dress torn, muttering, "2 heads, same eyes, same eyes." When asked what she'd seen, she refused to answer, and left town by winter. The preacher, Reverend Ellis, tried to calm the gossip from his pulpit. He warned his flock against spreading blasphemous talk, insisting the Lord alone judged what happened behind closed doors. But when someone nailed a dead dove to the church door with a splinter of wood carved into a cross, the whispers grew louder. Farmhands claimed they saw Evelyn standing in the fields at dusk, her nightgown soaked and her hair tangled like a ghost's. They said she held 2 bundles in her arms and sang lullabies that weren't of this world, songs her mother had never known. The old women said her voice carried down the valley, soft and sad, as if calling for forgiveness from the trees themselves. When frost came, Thomas Carter boarded up the windows of the house and stopped going into town. Smoke still rose from the chimney, but no one saw either of them outside again. Children dared each other to run up to the gate at night and touch the fence. One boy swore he heard crying from the barn, 2 cries, overlapping, as if in harmony. By spring, the rumors hardened into a kind of folklore. Some said the twins had been born dead, others claimed they lived, pale things that never grew, never left the cradle. And though no one dared speak it aloud, nearly everyone in Oak Bend believed the same forbidden thought, that Thomas Carter had fathered both his daughter's children, and that the family line had rotted from within. But one man, a traveling photographer, would soon uncover proof that the whispers weren't merely tales. His name was Samuel Breen, a traveling photographer from Montgomery who made his living capturing the dead and the dying. After the war, he roamed the back roads offering what people called mourning portraits. Photographs of the deceased, posed as if still alive. In the spring of 1867, he arrived in Oak Bend, drawn by word of a family in mourning at the Carter place. When Breen reached the homestead, he found the gates chained but the front door open. Inside, dust floated like smoke through shafts of light. He later told a storekeeper he felt the air thick, like breath you could almost taste. On the parlor wall hung 2 small garments, infant dresses, hand-stitched, both embroidered with the same initials, EMC. Evelyn appeared then, pale as parchment, holding a candle, though the sun was high. Breen said she spoke little, her voice low, almost a whisper. She told him the children had gone to rest, and she wished to preserve their memory. He followed her to the upper room. There, on a table draped with white cloth, lay 2 infants side by side. Their faces were unnaturally still, their features too similar, the same hollow eyes, the same faint cleft in the chin, the same twisted curl of hair. Breen raised his camera and felt his hands tremble. He would later swear one of the babies blinked as he adjusted the lens. When he developed the photograph days later, something strange appeared in the plate. A shadow standing over the cradle, though no one else had been in the room. It wasn't Evelyn, it wasn't Breen. The figure was taller, broader, a man, with one eye glinting pale, like glass catching sunlight. He packed his equipment that night and fled Oak Bend without collecting payment. The photograph was left behind in the local inn, where it was found years later, cracked and water-stained. Those who saw it said the figure's face resembled Thomas Carter, though he had been dead 3 months by the time the image was taken. The picture was soon locked away in the church cellar, but even there, it didn't rest. The pastor's wife claimed the glass plate grew damp with condensation each night, as if something inside it still breathed, and that was when Oak Bend stopped pretending it didn't believe in curses. By the summer of 1868, the Carter house had become a scar on the land. The cotton fields lay fallow, the fences rotted, and the well water turned foul with iron. People avoided the road that passed by it, claiming their horses would rear and refuse to go forward once they caught sight of the sagging roofline. The preacher called it a place of unrepented sin, though no one dared go near enough to test his words. Then, one night in late August, a red glow appeared on the horizon. Flames licked the sky over the ridge, and before morning, the Carter homestead was nothing more than black timber and smoke. The few who rode up to help found the house already consumed, the roof collapsed inward. The smell was sharp, pine tar, oil, and something worse. They found only one body inside, Evelyn's, curled near the cradle that had once held her twins. The charred remnants of 2 tiny forms lay beside her. But when the coroner inspected them, he found something he could not explain. The bones were small, but mismatched. One infant's remains were fully developed, the others barely formed, as if born of a different time. The record listed them as stillborn, though every witness swore they'd heard crying from the flames. No trace of Thomas Carter was ever found. Some believed he'd died months before, buried secretly on the property. Others claimed to have seen him after the fire, limping through the swamp, his face lit by the moon, half melted, half mad. In the weeks that followed, a sickness spread through Oak Bend. Cows gave birth to calves with twisted limbs. Infants died in their cribs. Wells went dry. The townsfolk whispered that the Carter curse had leaked into the soil, that the blood of father and daughter had poisoned the land itself. The church burned the surviving letters and ordered the property condemned, but before they sealed the site, one man, the new preacher, ventured into the ruins. He later told his wife he'd found a melted cross and a half-buried locket. Inside it was a lock of hair, 2 strands, intertwined, one darker than the other. He threw it into the fire. But as he did, he swore he heard a woman's voice whisper through the smoke. Blood remembers. After the fire, the Carter name vanished from Alabama records, or so it seemed. But in 1892, nearly 30 years later, a school teacher in Tallapoosa County discovered something strange while sorting through old enrollment books. 2 new children had joined her class mid-year, twins, pale and quiet, their hair the color of wheat ash. Their guardian, a man who called himself Mr. Holloway, had brought them from up north, though his accent betrayed deep southern roots. The twins' names were written in the roll as Evelyn and Thomas Holloway. What unnerved the teacher wasn't their names, it was their eyes. One child's left iris was clouded white, the other's right. When she mentioned it to the preacher, he turned pale and muttered that such marks sometimes run through the blood. Rumors swelled again in Oak Bend, carried on by the few who still remembered the burned house on the ridge. Some said Mr. Holloway was Thomas Carter's surviving kin, come back to reclaim what was left of the land. Others believed he was Thomas himself, aged yet unaged, having escaped the fire that should have killed him. The twins grew stranger with time. They spoke in whispers no one understood, drew shapes of houses burning and cradles smoking. By the winter of 1894, both children had disappeared. Their guardian claimed they'd gone north to relatives, but a hunter later found 2 small headstones deep in the woods, carved crudely with a knife side by side. On one, the letters E.M., on the other, T.C. The hunter who found them died within a year. His family swore his skin turned pale as wax before the end, as though something inside him was being drained. From then on, people said the Carter blood was cursed, doomed to repeat its sin, generation after generation. In every decade since, strange births had been whispered of in those same woods. Children born with mismatched eyes, fae, millies that moved without a word, women who vanished before winter. Every town keeps its secrets, but Oak Bend's wasn't just a secret, it was a stain passed down through veins that refused to die. And if you look closely at the genealogy records today, one name keeps reappearing, century after century, Evelyn May Carter. Her name never faded, it only multiplied. More than a century later, in 1973, a group of surveyors clearing land for a highway stumbled upon the ruins of the old Carter homestead. The house was gone, swallowed by pine and kudzu, but the stone foundation still jutted from the ground like old bones. Among the debris, half buried in red clay, they found a warped piece of metal, a locket fused shut by fire. Inside, faint beneath soot and corrosion, were the initials EMC. The State Archive in Montgomery catalogued it as artifact number 441B, with a note, possibly belonging to Evelyn May Carter, circa 1860s. Yet no one could explain the next discovery. When the locket was cleaned, tucked behind the tiny portrait was a scrap of cloth, linen, hand-stitched, embroidered with the date 1973. No one alive could have put it there. After the artifact's recovery, strange reports began again. Surveyors refused to camp near the site. They said their equipment turned on by itself at night, that they heard babies crying from the trees. One man claimed he saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, a woman in a white dress, holding 2 small bundles, whispering something he couldn't quite make out. Locals still avoid that patch of forest. Some say it's cursed, others say it's sacred, that Evelyn's spirit never left, because her blood never did. A few descendants of Oak Bend families still carry mismatched eyes, though they laugh when asked about it. But old-timers say you can always tell a Carter by their silence, by the way they stare too long at the ground when the wind moves through the trees. The story of Evelyn May Carter isn't written in textbooks. It exists only in fragments, burned letters, half-erased names, whispers that cling to the soil. But every generation, someone stumbles on a piece of it, a photograph, a name, a relic, and feels that same quiet dread. As if the land itself remembers. Maybe Tao. His sin was never buried. Maybe it was simply passed on, a living curse, beating beneath the surface of every new name, every new child born with that same haunted gaze. Because in Alabama, 1866 never truly ended, it just learned to wear new faces, and if the blood remembers, how long before it remembers you?